this cute little fox is surrounded by this beautiful mosaic stitching. This is the final patch that I'm adding to my jean jacket, and I'm going to highlight today the method I use to create this beautiful white mosaic in the background. I'm going to start with the fox and show how I added patchwork to the background, and then I'm going to jump right in to creating this beautiful mosaic stitch. I'll add a timestamp if you just want to jump straight ahead to creating this stitch, or you can just keep watching and see the process of getting ready to create this beautiful mosaic stitch. Let's get started. When it comes to needles and floss, I'm going to be using the 6-stranded embroidery floss, and I use 2 strands, and pearl cotton size 8. 2 needles that I like to use with embroidery floss are Milner's needles and embroidery needles. The top eye part is gold. It's a little easier to see. That's not necessary. The Milner's needles have a smaller eye, and they're a really nice needle to pull through stitching. And the embroidery needles have a little bit of a bigger needle, and it's a little bit wider at the top than the shaft, where the Milner's is a uniform size. So either of those work really well. And for the pearl cotton size 8, you can use Milner's needles. You can use size 1 or size 3. Here's 2 brands. You can also use a chenille, also called a tapestry needle, size 24. And there's another one called a long darner, number 1. I tend to use these tapestry or chenille needles with the pearl cotton, but any of these will work. I've used the fox template from my woodland set to create the fox in this piece, and I'll leave some links to the method that I used to cut out the fabric. And here's the fox. I cut out from the orange fabric everything but the legs, and then I've used some white, just plain white fabric that's actually some selvage, to add teardrop shapes for the face and some white on the tail. And now I'm going to add some black and brown for the legs. I'm stitching with 2 strands of floss to do that. So here are the legs, and I added a bit of black up on the ears. So now my fox is all ready. I'm going to add my patchwork. And I'm using the same fabrics that I've used in this series. So it's a limited palette. So I'm just taking little snippets of fabric and I'm moving them around the piece, trying to decide where I want to place them. And I know that eventually I'm going to be stitching over top of all of this, and so that's going to integrate all the design and color on these fabrics. So once I've chosen all my pieces, I'm going to stitch them down. First, I'm going to base them with regular sewing thread, and then I'm going to come in with 2 strands of embroidery floss, and I'm going to stitch around the pieces. So I just work my way around each piece, adding straight stitches, securing down all of the patchwork pieces, and that blends it into the background. And that means that there aren't any pieces sticking up or in my way when I come back in with my mosaic blanket stitch. Now that all my pieces are secured, I'm going to come in with some brown, the same brown that I'd mixed with the black for the legs, and I'm going to add a little bit of ground for this fox. So I'm just taking straight stitches and I'm moving along underneath the fox. So what this does is this gives the fox some grounding, so it doesn't look like it's just floating there in the middle of this piece. It's just a small detail that I think adds a lot. Now I've come back in and I've decided to add one more piece of patchwork. That's my other fabric that I've used in all these pieces. And now I'm ready to start doing my mosaic blanket stitching. I'm using pearl cotton size 8. This is by DMC. And to start this stitch, I can really start anywhere. I'm going to start in the middle and work out. So I'm going to pick a spot on the fox. I've decided to start right where the fox's back meets his face. So I'm coming up and I'm going to take the thread, I'm going to hold it in my left hand, and what that does is that creates a loop for me when I stitch and come up. It comes through the thread that I'm holding and it creates this stitch where each stitch is connected to the next. So I'm working my way across the back of the fox, and I'm going to continue around the fox, taking these stitches, and I'm not worrying about them being precisely the same distance apart or the same height. Just eyeballing it and moving my way around. And it's going to get tricky when I come to corners like this one. Here's the end of the tail, and I need to sort of turn and transition. So I take a stitch down, secure my thread, and then I come up in sort of the opposite corner of the stitch, and that gives me a starting point to continue doing my blanket stitch. Now here I am at the bottom of the feet, and what I could do is just go straight across the feet and not stitch in between each leg. But I decide that I'm going to go around each leg. It's a little more complicated. There's more turns. But I just take it slow and turn as I go and make sure that I'm taking enough stitches so that there's nothing pulling. And I just work my way up and down each leg. And here I am going back down this leg, and I'm not actually doing a blanket stitch. It's a bit of a cheat here to make the blanket stitch work. I'm just going down and coming up to make it look like it's a blanket stitch, just so everything fits. It's a little easier to do that. And then I can go back to doing my blanket stitch. So if you're in a tight place and you want to continue with this mosaic look, sometimes you do take a stitch that's not a true blanket stitch, where you're just going up and down and you're creating a stitch that looks like it fits and continues this pattern. That's perfectly okay to do. It's all about the effect you're going for. I don't believe there are any rules. I believe you can do whatever you want to make it work and to make your stitching look the way you want. So in these two spots where I'm going back down the legs, connecting it to the stitching that I've done previously, I'm taking straight stitches, and it looks fine. And I don't think, if I hadn't mentioned it, that anybody who looked at the piece would notice. And then when I'm done doing that, I can just continue with my blanket stitch. So I'm going to work my way up this left side of the fox all the way around, back to the same point where I started. And I'm going to take a stitch to join it to where I started. And then I'm going to come up and continue. I'm going to take my stitches through the previous row. So I'm going in where my last stitch was in the first row, and I'm doing a blanket stitch. So everything's connected. So I'm just going to continue to work my way around the fox with these blanket stitches. Continue going around and around and around because it goes off the edge on this right side. So what I can do now is just start at the corner and go as far as I can, and then just tie off and start again. When I get to the top, I actually take the blanket stitch right off the edge. And this is the same stitch that I often use in my pieces along the edges. So I can just go off the edge, and then as I turn and work my way down, I can continue the stitching. So it can go off the edge and it can come back off the edge. It's a very flexible stitch this way. So now I have a few areas that aren't connected, and I just need to fill in those small areas at the top and bottom and side. So here it is, all stitched. It looks like it's continuous, but actually I've started with the white stitching. It's going to add a nice border for this piece. And I went around a second time, and in some spots, I put the stitches closer together. One of the things that's really nice and flexible about the blanket stitch is you can put them really close together and you get a nice darker line, a bit of both here, and I really like the effect. Now I'm ready to take my piece and add it to my jean jacket. Here's where it's going to go. I'm going to stitch it on, And I'm going to use the same method that I've used previously. So I'll put a link to the previous video to show how I stitch it on. And then when it's stitched on, I'm going to add some more patchwork around the piece. So here it is, all stitched on. You can see that I've added some more of the same fabrics as patchwork to tie everything together, but it's not so matchy-matchy and perfect. I started with the bunny, and then I added the deer, and now I've added the fox. I've come in where all the patchwork is, and I've added slow stitching lines, and that has really added a lot. It's integrated the patches so that it all looks like one continuous piece. So you really can't tell that there is fabric that's stitched directly onto the jean jacket and that there are patches that were made separately and added. It's all looking like one piece. I'm going to show you what it looks like on the inside. You can see that where I had the larger patches, I've come in with matching thread and stitched it down. And that's just to make sure that these larger patches aren't kind of loose or floppy. If they're just connected at the edges, there's a chance that they may not look as good. So here it is, complete. I'm really happy with this back panel on the jean jacket, with my 3 animals. This was such a fun project. And here's my little fox with the beautiful mosaic behind it. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, happy stitching.